that actually the pharmaceutical industry, the whole healthcare business, which is of course a very prominent industry, has potentially a carbon footprint which is even bigger than the one of the automotive industry. And that came to as a surprise to quite a lot of people. So then it's probably less a surprise that today, of course, governmental organizations, for example, such as the European Union and also governmental organizations, of course, in Berlin, are more and more asking the question, how green is actually the science when we design drugs and when we produce them? This is probably not such a big surprise yet. However, the bigger surprise is probably that they also look now, how green are these medicines after we use them? So what do they do if they later on go into rivers or into our environment? What's the consequences of this? And this is exactly the first topic we want to discuss here. How green is the science behind drugs, and how green are the medicines we take? If you look at the drugs you find in the pharmacy today, most of them have been invented and developed by pharmaceutical and, let's say, biotech companies. And another question we want to ask is, how sustainable is this model, and how good is it also in looking forward to really serve all the diseases we have, also the neglected diseases on our planet, and how good is it really to distribute the drugs also, let's say, beyond countries such as Germany, really also into developing countries. That's the second question. So how sustainable is the current, let's say, research and development setup we have on our planet? Yeah, and this is what we want to discuss. And we are, of course, very happy here to have a very great panel here in the room. And I will start here with VANIA. VANIA is a professor at Leuphana. Actually, she studied before, she told me yesterday, in Sao Paulo. Currently, but she's not in Sao Paulo, but the University of Lübeck here in Germany, and a visiting professor at the University of York. Her background is green and sustainable analytical chemistry and sustainable chemistry education, also I think a very important topic. And VANIA really works hard to advance diversity and inclusion into science and also in emerging economies. Secondly, we're very happy to have online Dan. I hope we can see Dan. Dan, can you here in our panel? And we really have to thank Dan. Hi, Dan, good morning.
Hello.
We really have to thank Dan because he's currently in Seattle. So this is really commitment to our topic here, I would say, to be available at this time here. And Dan, he brings nearly 25 years of drug discovery experience as a medicinal chemist, where he worked in big pharma companies, but also in small biotech companies. So he really saw the whole landscape we currently live in, and where he led projects from concept to clinical candidates. So really the whole research value chain, so to say. And I think it's fair to say that Dan is one of these people who really knows how to make a drug. And today, Dan is working for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and where his work is focused on women's reproductive health. And there he's a senior program officer. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
And then we have NEELE here to my to my right. Just looking at the screen, then you sometimes get confused in this. NEELE, to my right, she received a state exam in food chemistry from the Martin Luther University at Halle-Wittenberg and from the Institute for Hygiene and Environment in Hamburg. And recently she started her PhD at the Institute of Sustainable Chemistry, exactly our topic here, at the Leuphana University of Lüneburg. And Lene is investigating a very important question, how we can design greener drugs. And this she also does with quite a prominent European project, which is the IMI, which is the initiative the Innovative Medicines Initiative of the European Union, and the project there is called Premier. So welcome, NEELE. And last but of course not least, we have Al. Al, can you hear us? Hi, Al. Al also is, let's say, in the same commitment league here as Dan, because Al is dialing in from Toronto, so it's really midnight. Hi, Al, welcome. Al is a professor at the University of Toronto, and Al is also the current CEO, so Chief Executive Officer and the founding CEO of the Structural Genomics Consortium, which is quite prominent in the research scene, which is a public-private partnership with labs in 5 countries in the US and in the EU. And with this organization, he's really supporting open science and where they are, for example, creating research tools for key proteins which are in the human genome and which are of high interest potentially also for future therapies. So welcome, Al. And then we have Sebastian here to the left, Sebastian Härtner, and Sebastian gained his diploma and PhD of chemistry at the University of Marburg in applied physical chemistry, and then he joined the company Merck KGaA in Darmstadt, where he worked as a lab manager for quality control and later as a lead for process intensification, working on worldwide projects in this topic. And today he's the innovation manager, and that's, I think, really interesting, in the engineering department and the principal project lead for smart manufacturing, an initiative at Merck in Darmstadt. So welcome, Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so now, again, I would recommend to dial into this slide.com and slido.com here, and to use this code hash 19968122, which you see here, and then you can also participate in the polls, and also, as I said, you can pose questions here. And we would like to start with this right away with a first question to get up to speed here, so to say. And I don't know whether you can see the question now. So the first question is, what do you think are the major sources of pollution from drugs in the environment as of today? Is it the drug excretion from patients into wastewater, or is it unused drugs discarded into household waste, or is it manufacturing of drugs by the industry? So I think we give it another second here. All right. So, and this is interesting. Thank you very much for participating. So great to see this. We even see it. So how the poll is evolving. So still some movement there. So manufacturing of drugs, industry, drug excretion, or discarded drugs into household waste. This is the starting question. Okay, so thank you very much. Great that everybody participated here. And what I will now tell you will probably surprise you, obviously, from this result, as most people were thinking this is about the manufacturing of drugs in the industry. So the question is, what's the major source of pollution of drugs in the environment? And actually, according to a study, and we will talk about this later, from, let's say, 1 year ago, it's actually basically the drug excretion into wastewater. So in a way, you take a drug, you go to the restroom, and some day later, some of the drug ends up in the next river here. And this is I think quite a surprising point, and this is exactly how we want to start the discussion here, I guess. And I would really like to start here with NEELE. So NEELE, how green are our drugs today?
I would say, as it doesn't matter during drug discovery and development how the compound behave in the environment, we have as a consequence these compounds in the environment, and they can affect their environmental and human health. So as you see, as you have seen from the poll, the main pathway is the excretion by the patients, because these compounds should be very stable to be effective. But on the other hand, then they can enter, or they are excreted by the patients And in the wastewater treatment plants, it's not possible yet to remove all of them, especially also transformation products which are formed. And then, as I said, they enter the mainly aquatic environment, and their typical effects are maybe the antimicrobial resistance, as well as the endocrine disruptor effects. These are maybe the most prominent topics we are talking about.
Neele, could you perhaps explain the two terms, resistance? So what would be the problem of this one? And I think especially also the endocrine point you made. What's the challenge there?
The challenge, maybe the WHO stated that antimicrobial resistance will be one of the major problems will be tackled in the next years. Because resistance are formed. Typically, we are thinking maybe about our body. For example, when I had to take a lot of antibiotics, they will be formed in my body, and maybe I'm a patient then, which where it will be difficult to treat with an antibiotic. But they are also formed in wastewater treatment plants because there we find the antibiotics, and therefore the microbes get used to it and build a resistance mechanism. And the endocrine disruptor part. We see already a feminization of fish and also of the human man. So I think this is also maybe a well-known topic.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is linked also to, let's say, drugs which are linked to contraception, right? So what you call sometimes the pill, right? This is where these endocrine disruptors come from. So do you think this is already now, let's say, a global problem? These substances in the water, or is it evenly distributed? Or so what's your impression there?
I would say it's a global problem. I mean, especially also in the south, so the global south, where we have maybe no wastewater treatment. Globally, 80% of wastewater isn't treated at all. So I would say it's a global problem, and for sure, when you look to the manufacturing countries, there you have quite of large peaks of excretion in the environment.
Okay, thank you. So, what should we then do to tackle this problem?
It would be a good approach to include environmental parameters into the drug discovery and development phase, because when you have a solution really at the source, then you can, then you don't have to find a solution for a later problem coming up. So like try to improve the wastewater treatment, which is already costly, and therefore to have this in mind already in the design phase would be, I would say, a very effective approach.
Okay, thank you. So Dan, I think as we heard, you are a very experienced medicinal chemist. So what's your pick on this? So do you think it would be possible to improve the, let's say, the environmental effect of drugs?
In terms of which way, I think in terms of just disposal, yes. I think, in terms of, dosage, it all depends on the therapeutic indication associated with that. And I think more importantly, and although this isn't the largest issue, is in terms of manufacturing. And I think the pharmaceutical industry overall has tried to reduce waste considerably. And even back 25 years ago, we started to think about this pretty deeply. And in terms of, broader manufacturing, trying to reduce, hazardous solvents, et cetera, making sure that we capture any sort of environmental waste before it gets out is key. It's something that we continue to monitor, henceforth moving forward. I think beyond that, I think it's just sort of social responsibility of if, these medicines aren't being utilized, how do you dispose of them properly? And I know here in Seattle, for example, we take great strides to ensure that we capture those and they don't end up in the environment overall.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think we will, this is a very important point also about the manufacturing. This was also part of the question. Still, let's say the surprising point is, and this is of course just going to the drug molecules itself and not, let's say, to the production, which we will touch on later on, is that most of the drugs which are found in the environment are actually, let's say, going through the patient first, so to speak. And that's kind of a surprising point. And now I think what NEELE said is the question is, how fast are they degraded in the environment, and how long will they last in the environment as drugs? So how would the perfect drug molecule look like? First of all, excluding the manufacturing with respect to its environmental effect, NEELE.
So, I mean, first of all, for sure, the safety and efficacy aspects are very important. So the drug should be effective and safe. But then looking maybe for windows, for example, of stability. So when you keep in mind that stability depends on the conditions of the system you have, it's possible that the compound can be stable in the human body to reach the target where it should be then effective. But then later on, if it's excreted, you have a different pH, you have a different availability to light or other microbes, then you can look for, okay, then it should be degraded. And so therefore degradation is not a question of yes or no, it really depends on conditions, on kinetics, yeah.
So if I understand this correctly, you're saying the perfect drug from this perspective would be one which would be sufficiently stable in the body. Of course, it would be efficacious and it would be well tolerated. I mean, that's a given. It would be sufficiently stable in the body to do its work, so to say. However, it would be sufficiently unstable in the environment to be degraded fast.
Yeah, just look for all the functions we need, the function in the human body, but till the end of the life cycle of a compound, it's also the environmental part which should be considered. So, yeah, the whole life cycle of a compound.
Yeah, and there perhaps again, back to Dan. So how would you see this compromise between the stability in the body and the, let's say, the high stability in the body and the lower stability in the environment?
I think that's a complicated issue because drug metabolism in the body is going to be very different than environmental decomposition or metabolism or breakdown. And I think this becomes the sort of challenge. You know, we look for drugs to be as stable as possible, to have their efficacy, and we have to be cognizant of, you know, metabolites, for example. How that happens in terms of, you know, liver enzymes are going to be very different in cytochrome P450s that you're not going to find in the environment. So trying to get the perfect drug that's going to have the safety and efficacy that we need in the human body, and that once excreted then will be broken down in a different way, I think is going to be a significant challenge. I don't see an easy solution to that, but maybe there are other people in the audience that have that experience beyond what I do.
Yeah, thank you, Al. I think that's at least sounds like a very reasonable point that this might be some compromise also at some point in time. So, as we always have to do this in the context of let's say this environmental discussion, sometimes it's also about compromises. So if we would, for example, think about a drug which is a little bit less stable in the body in order to be significantly less stable in the environment, this could, for example, mean that in the future you would have to take 2 pills a day instead of 1 pill a day. So that could be one potential consequence of such a direction. So perhaps going to Al. Al, I mean, from the research perspective you're coming from, so how do you see this topic of perfect new drugs also, let's say, looking into the environmental perspective?
I'm trying to imagine how one would do the chemistry, since most of the drug catabolism inside the body is oxygenation through molecular oxygen attacking the drug. That's what these CYP enzymes in your liver do. And that's the most common way of catabolizing molecules in the environment too, through oxidation. So it's almost the same chemical reaction that occurs inside your body and in the environment to break down the drugs. So you can see the problem, right? You can see the problem. If you're trying to design a molecule that's stable or sensitive to oxygenation, in the first blush, it'll be the exact same thing as what the environment's doing. So I think to think about, it's going to be a really hard problem because you're narrowing down maybe to nothing the possible chemistry that you have access to make a drug. It's an important problem, but boy, it's not going to be something that's going to be able to be done in the next 20 years, I think.
So Danya, what's your perspective on this?
Well, so good morning and thanks. It's really interesting to discuss with you and to just reflect about this very, it's a fundamental point. How to design and how to use and how to deal with more or greener medicines. And the first aspect that I would like to emphasize is that, of course, this molecule should be 100% effective, but for a certain time. Maybe it's a question of time, how to design to play the role that is necessary, and after that, of course, be non-toxic or not impacting the environment also. And it should have no undesirable side effect. This is the ideal, and it's just the way to arrive there that we are discussing, how to do that. Of course, it's not completely possible. We always have some effects, better ones sometimes. And also, it should be easy to administer this drug, and this is the point. And I like what you mentioned, Franz, about maybe it's better to divide, to have 2 pills instead of just one big one, and also playing with this framework of time. So this is also important. And I would like to highlight that a drug should be accessible to all people in the world, not for just some. And talking about the perspective of synthesis, this is also part of a greener drug. Why? Because we have to think about how to obtain this molecule, and the molecule should have a service. Molecules in general should have this role. But to design, to use, and to deal with a drug, we maybe need to think about green and sustainable chemistry, how to prevent pollution or problems from the very beginning. And it's interesting because it's not only about the molecule, it's how to arrive there and how to deal with this transformation products after the use, let's say, of a medicine. So I think that we need to use maybe technologies to obtain these molecules, but also to determine, because we are able to know what we have when we can determine quantity and qualitatively what we have in the, not only in our body, but also in the environment. So everything, if we want a greener drug, we need to be conscious that we need greener ways to arrive there and to determine what we have. Not, we are talking about urine and etc., but it's about human beings. What we have, how to assess, how to be not only greener, but more sustainable and to provide a healthier environment, because we are also part of the environment. We are not disconnected. So I think we need to apply the systems thinking concept when we talk about medicine or greener medicine in general. But I think we are in the way. I'm really optimistic. I'm always optimistic, but being very conscious about what we have in the present moment. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Vanya, I agree with you. I think it's already a starting point that we are now having these kind of discussions on what does it mean, what is, let's say, under the perspective of a green drug, what's the perfect drug. But of course we see, as we heard from Dan and Al, this doesn't come for free, so to speak. This will be an effort also on the scientific side, and will be also a scientific challenge. Still, it's good to look at this and to ask the question how we can tie this into the total, let's say, science equation of finding, designing new drugs. Yeah, and I think now you pointed at the second aspect here, which is, of course, once you, let's say, have designed the drug, the perfect drug molecule, so to say, the question is, of course, how to make it. First, probably in smaller amounts for let's say, testing with cells, for example, or with enzymes, which people in the business often call the targets. And so you said something like a green chemistry there, right? So what does that mean?
Well, we are applying a lot already, and maybe in the future we are only talking about chemistry as something already green, but the idea is to use only non-toxic chemicals, but also not impacting process to avoid pollution in general. This is like the main idea of green chemistry. And when we talk about having a more sustainable approach, including green chemistry, that could be something really fundamental, is to consider the other fields. So actually, we need to include chemistry, or we need to involve chemists to other fields to understand better how to design, how to use the molecules too. So we are not disconnected. It's about ethics also. It's about how to do, not only in our labs, but how to scale up the process that is completely different when we are also designing the methods. But I think that we need to avoid waste in general also when we are producing the drugs. And this is really important in all process to produce any kind of product, to avoid, let's say, byproducts. If we have that, they should be not toxic at all. And also, we should include them, this not byproduct, but let's call them co-product, again in the next cycle to use as a, let's say, a new material to a new chain. And because waste is considered a matter, so that is wrong in place and space. It's a concept. And it's a negative kind of word, but we need to reimage this concept also. And for all process, I really think that we are responsible. So we have several R's. The first one should be for all professionals be responsible in a wider sense. It's not only about the pure lab work, but having this wider perspective, the context, putting chemistry in context. This is greener or more sustainable to not only to design, but to deal with this very important topic, how to improve health for all people. Because if we have some countries with problems, this is also our problem here in this, let's say, European Union, but I think this is something that we need also to discuss about the more sustainable way to live.
Yeah, I think green chemistry, I mean, for some people this sounds probably like a contradiction in itself. And perhaps now we ask the chemist Sebastian here, can you, Sebastian, as a chemist, can you explain to non-chemists what's the difference between chemistry and green chemistry?
Good question. I would say the difference is really that on the one hand, as we have heard before, so you want to decrease your waste. Yeah? You want to use raw materials which are coming, let's say, not from the oil basis, but you want to have them from the renewable basis. Yeah? And the other thing is what we have mentioned is the impact on the environment. So we also want to decrease this, and the combination. I think this is the interesting part where we are all coming from. So we are all curious about bringing in green chemistry, or let's say the greener drugs. And at the end, all these things have to interact. So we really have to know how can we design drugs on the way that they are not impacting our environment later on. We have to think about how are our synthesis routes or our recipes to produce these drugs based on renewables. Yeah, so this is very interesting. And then at the end is also you need the technology to do this. So you need to understand what kind of new technologies can we do so that we can also decrease our energy consumptions for producing the materials. And at the end, I think this is the combination of a green drug or a greener drug.
Thank you, Sebastian. I think this was really clear. And as we said at the beginning, of course, the idea of this meeting is also to go into the interactive mode here. And there I would really like to mention, we have here now in the room, so to speak, we have Ulrike and Melody here supporting us with questions. And to facilitate us with questions here in the room, we have Aaron for online questions. So my point is, perhaps let's first start, Aaron. So do you have online questions?
There are a few questions coming in here, and yeah, some great ones. One of them, which I think is related to a topic that was talked about a few minutes ago, and maybe I can release this question, was could a non-toxic drug be turned into a toxic compound by our organism, or let's put it, an organism in the environment? I think it's an interesting question.
Yes, thank you. So, Dan, do you want to take that one?
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Yeah. Yeah. So, could a non-toxic drug be turned into a toxic compound by our organism, or let's put it, an organism in the environment?
Well, there's always a possibility of this. I mean, there's a term known as idiosyncratic toxicity. So you could generate a molecule that gets, converted into what we refer to as a metabolite that could react in the body. And this is, well documented. Aspirin, for example, at a high enough dose can be toxic. There's been discussion like if aspirin was discovered today, would it actually make it all the way to market? So there's always the potential for that. And I imagine environmentally as well, the breakdown of the molecules, depending on what that is. And if you think about some of the core structures of drugs, they could relate to other toxic impurities or cause, for example, genotoxicity. So there's always a potential associated with that. And it's something that as a medicinal chemist, as we design molecules, we proactively think about what the potential side products or metabolites could be and identify what those are and assure that there's no safety flags associated with that, if at all possible.
Yeah, thank you, Al. I think this is, so if you take a drug, so normally, let's say that if the toxicity of the drug is assessed, this includes assessing the so-called metabolites. So as Al said before, of course, the body very often oxidizes the drugs, and sometimes these oxidized products can be, let's say, more toxic than the parent drug. That is very well possible, and that's well documented in many cases, as Dan said. And that is, let's say, priced into the toxicity assessment of a drug. Of course, now the second part of the question was, and there I go over again to NEELE here, whether this could also happen in the environment, that let's say a drug can be, let's say, toxified within the environment.
Yes, I wouldn't exclude this case. I know some studies there they showed that by biodegradation in the environment or by photodegradation, the mix afterwards can be more ecotoxic. So, for example, against the bacterium Vibrio fischeri, a typical test in the ecotoxicity section. Yeah, so I wouldn't exclude this case. Yeah.
So thank you. So are there questions in the room here? There's a question over there, please.
First of all, thanks a lot for the great discussion, and it's great to see my former colleague Sebastian in person finally. It's me, Yelda. Hi. So we talked a lot about preventing or developing more green drugs, and I want to ask if it's also an option to capture the drug or extract it from wastewater before it enters the environment. Thank you.
I think this is a very good question. I'm not sure we yet have very good answers to this, but let's see whether there are people here volunteering to comment on this.
So from my point of view, yes, I think we are already starting with this. I already know that, for example, also in our company, so we have a production and we are also, let's say, have to deal with wastewater treatment. So at the end, there are already, let's say, in addition, new investments coming up that we have, let's say, the final step of the wastewater treatment also to really decrease these kind of amounts of toxic materials at the end. So I do see, and as I mentioned before, this topic of technology will evolve. So, and we also have to discuss where, at which point do we need the technology, and what kind of technology really enables us in the next steps to, let's say, fulfill these needs in our environmental treatment. So the combination is really, and every time it's the timeline aspect. So what is the next step and what should be the next steps? Yeah? And as we heard before, is it what will we see in future? So there is also some timeline, what we're talking about, 10 to 20 years. The idea is there. We are trusting that the technology and the innovation will lead us to these points. But it's sometimes, it will take time because we have to learn these. So at the end, yes, I would totally say be very ambitious that these are possible technologies and they're coming up sooner or later, some new things.
So I see.
I just know two nice examples, but at the moment these are still two approaches, but they need more awareness, so maybe I mention now. The one example are the X-ray contrast agents, where they try to collect the urine directly from the patients for, let's say, 3 hours after they gave them it. Something what is maybe starting now in the Netherlands or also in some hospitals in Germany, but it's not well common. And another example, I forgot. You can continue, I will put it up later.
Yes, thank you, Neil. So I think that there are two aspects, right? What we just heard, very interesting to your excellent question here. And one is to look into wastewater per se and see what we can do there, as Sebastian mentioned and as Neele mentioned. Of course, also the opportunity, let's say, to act earlier in a specific environment, for example, in a hospital, or of course, then let's say really tailored to the specific drug, as you just mentioned, the contrast media as an example where you, some people, let's say, are really challenged by then taking a lot of this stuff, and it's really about large quantities. Where then, of course, there are situations where you collect this, even let's say more in a hospital context, for example. And I think there's another point here from Vanya.
Oh, I think Neil
I get
remembered.
it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, the other example is diclofenac, also well common compound with effects in the environment. And there you say when you use Voltaren, a cream, at first not wash directly your hands, use a towel before. And to get most of it rid and put it then not, for sure, not in the toilet, but in the bin. And then afterwards you can wash your hands. And this can decrease the amount entering the wastewater immensely.
Yeah, may I add?
Yeah.
What excellent question. And as you can see, we have different ways to face the problem. And in industry, it's we have larger scales, of course, but also as consumers or society in general, we have also to be aware about how to deal with, how to collect, how to reintroduce, how to manage the waste. So management, it's something really important for waste. Yeah, but I do agree when we have to separate something from a complex mixture, depending, so each case is a case, it's not a general rule, but it's important to study how to remove this active or bioactive compound from the bulk of this matrix. So it's really nice to see both combinations, like in smaller but also larger scales, how to face the problem. Yeah, and how we are also involved in this discussion as people in general. I think it's important to see our role also as society, how to deal with. Yeah, excellent question.
So perhaps let's give the online community here the opportunity for another question. And Aaron, is there another question?
Yeah, here, there's another question that I just put up on the screen here, and it says, how could mineralization of chemical compounds help break down drugs? Maybe we have to explain what mineralization is to begin with. Yeah,
I agree. So I think this is a topic here also for NEELE, right?
Okay, I will take it. Yeah, it's important to differentiate between mineralization and degradation to highlight that if a compound is just degraded, let's say the first step, then there is the risk of transformation products, so which can be even more toxic, or it can be a big mixture and you don't know much about it. So therefore, mineralization means to water, carbon dioxide, and organic acids and other salts. So no transformation products as an organic compound. Yeah, and therefore it's important to look for the mineralization rate. When you just look for the removal rate, for example, in a wastewater treatment plant, you can say, hey, I won, I can't detect this compound anymore, but it's still, or maybe very likely that there is a mix of transformation products.
Yes, thank you. And I think this question, thank you, Aaron, nicely ties to our original, or let's say initial discussion on the so-called perfect drug, right? So let's say at least from an environmental perspective, obviously, the perfect drug would obviously then be the drug which would mineralize, so fastly degrade and ultimately mineralize in the environment. But still, I think we have the very important piece, which was also mentioned by Dan in our initial poll here, how we then manufacture the drugs on large scale in a green way. Perhaps, Sebastian, you can give us some insight on this.
Yeah, I'm happy to do this. And I think it's very interesting point, which is also really a thing where we are now working since 10 years on this. And you mentioned this in my introduction, process intensification. I think this is the important wording. So you really want to intensify your process. What does this mean at the end? You could think about producing drugs without any solvent, or even only just using water or something. But with this, you also need new technologies. So not as we are now used to it in a multi-purpose environment, to have standardized systems which can be capable to do a lot of different things, but not in a perfect manner. So what we want to do is we want to integrate different kind of technologies which are really able to deal with different kind of needs of your recipe. And this is, I think, one of the topics where we are now working, and really working in Germany with all the big companies. It's coming from the specialty chemistry part, but it's now also part of our healthcare and with this drug production environment. And this is very interesting. So the new game changer for us is an automation, or an automated module which we can plug in as Lego bricks together. And as you're all used to it, your USB plug-in is the entrance into the internet. So it enables you to be very, let's say, effective using your computer. And this is the same in future also for our production. So what we can do is, if we have designed a new way of synthesis, and if we have identified new technologies which are not actually in our production environment, we easily can use it and implement it and just use one plug, and then we are able to use this in a fully automated way, and with this we can run recipes. And for me, the best example, let's say also in the German environment, everyone knows Thermomix. Yeah. So what helps you to, and why is Thermomix so everyone knows this? Because you can do and upload recipes very easily, and everyone can reproduce the quality of the meal. Yeah? And this is the same what we're talking about here. So if we have defined a recipe, and if we know what kind of technology can be used, we can easily distribute recipes, and also say worldwide, and I think this is also what Vanya mentioned, we want to be enable our world to access drugs. And this is one of the technology which really enables us this. We are starting to grow with a lot of different kind of modules, but you can easily connect them and do a recipe on this. And this at the end have the quality products which we want to have.
So in a way, you're saying, as you, let's say, cook the meal with smaller pots, you're more flexible and you have less waste and you have a greener chemistry.
Exactly. Exactly. This is what we have really proven in the last years, together with a lot of different kind of companies, and we are now really going into this future world. And it's also a time perspective. So we are now have, let's say, the first modules, the first plants we are building on this. And we do see this is evolving. And at the end, if we are, let's say, having a look into the future of 10 years or whatever, it will be as we are used to in the automobile industry. We will share all your equipment. So we will not buy them anymore. We just really share them with a lot of different kind of companies and use them for the production of the products. So this could be really a future-oriented technology. And with this, you're not having assets standing around. So this is also an environmental topic. So producing production sites costs carbon footprints. And at the end, if we can use them together, it's much better. So there are a lot of opportunities coming up in the future. And at the end, this collaborative thing, what we are discussing here, this is at the end, the key of this, let's say, challenges what we are facing.
Yeah. Thank you, Sebastian. It's also, I must say, when I heard first intensified process, this didn't sound like a greener process, but I think you well explained that this is very much the case. And I think there's another question here in the room.
Actually, now I have two questions. So one thing is maybe just to come back to what you said before, because I really like the idea of, I never thought about when you talked about this cream to first wipe your hands in, I think, a paper towel, not a real one, because then it would be the same. It will just go in the water later. Why are such really great things not in the package insert? Just a question, because this is something I think which would really help because a user at the end of the day would not know about it if it's not there. It's just an idea when I heard it, because I was working in regulatory and I thought we never had something like that in any of the package insert I saw over the, I don't know, past 30 years or so. So that would really make a big difference if we can think through that, maybe for a couple of different products. And coming to you, I would really be interested. It's a really great idea. So coming also back to registration, I think that would be interesting, because then you, who would then be the ones who would be the owner or who have to apply for that? Because I think there's a couple of other registration problems with it, or challenges, let's say.
Challenges is the right wording. I think it's, I'm honest, I think it's a game changer. And we already see it during the approvals of these kind of, let's say, synthesis in the German law. So we are not used to it. Now we are normally used to the classical world. And this is a total new way of how we could do this. The interesting thing is that we are already starting to discuss this with let's say, the authority approval organizations. I would say from the technology point of view, there is no, let's say, big issue. The only thing is that we have to refigure or phrase our wording in the laws that we are able to do this. And this is, let's say, what I mentioned. It's a time. You really have to talk about this. And this is, I think, the same. If we are aware of that we should use paper towels, and I was also not aware of this, and this is a cool, let's say, idea, then we are starting to change this. And I think it's the same. We had this discussion yesterday also. Our, let's say, children are now starting to go into the direction, they are used to it and they want to use only, let's say, bio-based foods. Yeah, say they are going into the direction we do not want to use meal or something, because it's much better for the environment. And this is this time of generations which will change. And this will, at the end, help us. And we are now developing the technology for this. So at the end, our generations behind us and my children also can profit from this. And this is my hope, where I'm working on this.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So you had another remark?
Yeah, just one question, because this is so new and so good for the environment. So are you also then respecting the greenhouse gas protocols, scope 1, 2, 3, to just measure all of that? Because if you do that, that would really make sense, because to do it afterwards, it's so much more difficult.
We are already in a consortium now where we're starting a new, also really publicity-funded project on this, that we are defining really KPIs, energy KPIs, which can directly measure this. So at the end, we have these modules for these technologies, and each of them will directly have, let's say, numbers which we can bring together, and then with this calculate the overall carbon footprint of our process. So these are these ongoing topics we worked for since 10 years now, and now they are still really coming together more and more closely. And this is why I'm really happy to push this through. And yes, there are constraints, and yes, we have to talk about this. And this is why I'm sitting here, because I'm convinced that this is the technology we need for our future generations.
So, thank you. I think we strived quite some topics here in this first session. Let's say from the environmental perspective, how could the perfect drug look like? And again, we cannot emphasize enough, this should always be efficacious and of course safe. I mean, that's absolutely clear for the patient. That's the first purpose, but also it should be safe for the environment. Then we came across how to make it with green chemistry and how to manufacture it also in larger scales with smaller pots, so to say here, which probably like, as you said, a Thermomix or so also have some let's say, electronic intelligence here. And then ultimately, of course, also how to, as was mentioned by Vanya, how to deal with waste and as we discussed, how to deal with the waste. And I think, thank you really for this comment here from the audience. And if we really think this through, we should also then go into the direction, obviously, of the registration. So this piece will, I'm quite convinced, to be honest, also be a part of future discussions and registrations. And as a logical consequence, of course, also then let's say in a future, probably patients will be informed about this, for example, in the so-called German Beipackzettel. So I think this is excellent, what we discussed, and let's now take the opportunity to switch over to our next topic again here with a poll. And for those people who came in later, please just scan the QR code here and go to slido.com, and then you can also participate in our next poll here. Exactly, and the question is, and as I cannot see it here, I will go just a little bit like this, is, and this already was also kind of insinuated here by Vanya, in your opinion, what is most hampering the fair access of drugs to patients worldwide? First, the industry-driven research and development landscape we currently have. Second, research focused on diseases tailored for developed countries, patent protection of drugs, or let's say price tag of drugs. Industry-driven, the current landscape, and we will come to this in the discussion, the research focus, which is tailored for developed countries, patent protection, and price tags. Okay. So I will continue if I get the sign here from UYEN, who's the mastermind in the back here, by the way. Thank you, UYEN. So now I got the result here exactly. So as we see, and honestly, I think there's no right or wrong. This is just the, let's say, the picture of the opinion here that we have. Obviously, there is the research focused on disease tailored for developed countries. Patent protection of drugs, more or less the same as price tags, and then the industry-driven research and development landscape. That's interesting, and now I will do something I probably shouldn't. I will start with the one with the lowest percentage here, and will try to get L in. Al,
I'm here.
can you hear us? Because
I would do it exactly as you're expecting, the other way around.
exactly.
And so
Al, what's your perspective on this?
Well, let's go back to the to what we heard about before with the super cool concepts of people trying to drive production to something more sustainable and less impactful on the environment. What's driving that? It's not industry per se trying to reduce costs or maximize profits, or that might happen. It's regulation and policy. So it's the regulation and policy environment that drives industry to try to innovate in new areas in many respects. So what is the sort of regulation and policy scene of the pharmaceutical sector? We wake up and we take it for granted that industry makes drugs, and then we tell industry to maximize shareholder value. And if that's your starting position, you're going to get the pharmaceutical industry working in areas where they can maximize shareholder value. That's what we create companies to do. All of us, through our pension plans, own stock in Merck and Pfizer and all the big companies, and we have every right to go to their annual general meetings and say, make less money, but we don't, right? So we have tacitly agreed to create a system in which drugs are manufactured by industry whose role is to maximize profit. If you start from those starting positions, you're going to get expensive drugs in areas where they can make the biggest profit. They're not going to be worried about access to medicines in, sub-Saharan Africa. They're not going to work on diseases for which there are 20 people. It's a rational economic decision. So I don't think we should point the light at the pharmaceutical sector. I think we should turn the flashlight on ourselves and ask, what is the aim of inventing medicines? Is medicine a human right, or is medicine a product that is in our economic system? And once you make that decision, much like the regulators are saying, make sure your chemistry is greener, the world will change. And so all the other 3 points where the drugs are expensive, that makes sense under the current system. Patents are used to exclude people from the market. That makes sense in the current system. Drug prices are so high. That makes sense in the current system. And it's the system that constructs all the things that we have. If we don't like it, we have to change the system. Don't blame anybody except us.
So Al, thank you for this start really getting into the topic. So you're saying we should really rethink or think also about other systems, how to come up with drugs. Dan, if I may also include you here, so as you have been, as we heard, quite a while in the industry, in big pharma, in biotech, and now also in Bill and Melinda Gates. So what's your perspective on when you hear what Al said?
I completely agree. I mean, and that's part of the reason why I left the private sector, is because there was this need or desire to make money from inside and the drive from shareholders. I think the other thing that I would add, though, and I've seen this change, with social media, is that we do have a voice for change. I think industry overall is becoming much more aware of corporate social responsibility. You can't hide in the herd anymore. If you aren't providing access, if you aren't lowering prices, if you aren't making drugs available across the globe as a human need, then you're going to be noted and people will speak up against that. And I think that's an important part, is that we do have a voice, we have a strong voice. And I think we all play a part in that, as Al stated. So I completely concur with that. And I think we have to think about ways of how do we incentivize the pharma company to do more corporate social responsibility, to make medicines accessible, to make drugs affordable across the globe.
So how would you then incentivize them, Dan?
I think there are a couple of different ways that you can look at this. I think, for-profit or private sector companies are that. They are driven to make some form of profit. The question then becomes, well, with that profit, can you mitigate windfall? So can you take some percentage of that profit and incentivize them and say, look, if you're making this percentage of money on this, say, blockbuster drug or this sort of, high value asset, can you then add some percentage back into global health, for example? So, if you're making $1 billion on a drug, some small percentage of that could then be applied back into the company to generate additional work or research in the public sector goods. So you can say, okay, you're decreasing the delta associated with this, you're still getting money back into the organization, but we're saying we're trying to drive that money towards other aspects that can be used for global health, so it doesn't all go back into your pocket. So I think there's a way to balance that and say, look, you're still making a profit. You can then use some of this money and then apply it to additional ways to enhance research and global efforts to develop additional medicines, other areas, invest in other vaccine developments, et cetera. So I think there's a way to move forward and do that, and to allow that balance of for-profit and non-for-profit, if you will.
Yeah, so when I listen to you both, Al and Dan, I basically hear now two topics, which are of course intertwined, right? One topic is how to, let's say, further distribute drugs which are already there. As you said, right, you make a lot of money perhaps in some countries, and then you can be more generous in some other countries. That's the case number one. And the second case is, and I think that's also what Al was mentioning, the drugs which are not already there, right, for indications, which was also on our poll, which might not be so interesting from a purely business perspective. So how are we going to deal with those? And perhaps giving back the question to Al, how would we now tackle these let's say, to finding these drugs for diseases where we don't have drugs yet, or not sufficiently good ones?
So I just want to comment on what Dan said first. It's hard to imagine that charity is a sustainable strategy. Charity either by the companies or by people. I think in the dream world, we'd have a more equitable way of inventing medicines. The profits to the pharmaceutical sector come mostly from the public, right? So in Germany and Canada and even in America, most of the money spent on drugs is paid by the government through Medicare, through Medicaid, or through our national health systems. So we are heavily invested in the early research as the public. We are heavily invested in procuring the drugs, providing the clinical trial infrastructure through our hospitals. It's not an impossible idea to start a parallel system in which the public sector takes on the responsibility to invent medicines for the areas in which there is no market. And I honestly think there's no other way. Trying to get a company and their investors to invest in an area of science for which there is no market is, as we say, pushing on a rope. It goes fundamentally against the capitalist system we set up. Dan's advocating for taxing them, and in essence taxing them. We already do that, and it's something that the foundation, Gates Foundation, has been doing, and it's quite effective. But like I say, I think we need to develop a parallel universe where the public walks in, as I said at the very beginning, with the idea medicine should be a human right. How do we create a system that makes that happen? I don't think it's possible with merging this profit, maximize profit, not just profit, right? Maximize profit system with the public good to invent medicines for which there is no market. I am not confident that that can happen.
Al, so now let me try to ask the question. I mean, obviously I did some research before we had this discussion here, and if you look, as I said in the intro, on the drugs which are currently on the market, of course they're let's say heavily, designed and developed by pharmaceutical and biotech enterprises. So what gives you, or what should give us the confidence now for this, let's say, second universe you are mentioning, that we then will also be successful, though so far we cannot really prove it from what's out there if you go to the pharmacy?
Absolutely, but it's a real kind of an unfair question, of course, since for the last 50 years we've said pharma and all of our government policies are sort of designed for industry to invent medicine. There's no law of physics in your high school or gymnasium textbooks that says drugs have to be invented by industry, right? It's just the way that we set up the system. I tell you, if I hired, let's pretend I was the CEO of a new public drug discovery thing, I hire Dan, I hire you, I hire some of your colleagues at NUVISAN, I've got the skill sets to make a drug. It's just the funding. And so currently, there's no mechanism for such a public good drug discovery organization to get public funding because the public sector doesn't want to get into it because that's industry's job. So if we change the framework, then it might be possible. There's no lack of talent out there, and there's no lack of really dedicated scientists like you guys and Dan and his colleagues that could do it and would do it under those and under those circumstances and under that framework.
So thank you for, let's say, bringing this new universe here up on the discussion. I'm sure there are questions around this in the room. Let's start with the room here. First, I think it's hard to see against the light, so sorry, please.
There is one question here. Yeah.
Thank you. I would also agree that we need a proper system and not charity to do this and to finance it. So there is a common good economy, Gemeinwohlökonomie, from Christian Felbers, published 2010, who says that with certain political framework and rules, you can easily steer also this. And I would think that this could also apply for pharma. So this is just to give you an example from the food industry. So currently the normal cow milk, which has a far bigger economic CO2 footprint, has 7% of tax. And the vegan drinks like rice, etc., has 19%. The question is, why is this? And in the same way, probably with drugs who have a less footprint, you could probably have a less tax rate. For example, it's just one of the things which is there. So there are political frameworks where I think it can be easily done that greener drugs are developed, because there's also financial interest to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vanya,
Yeah,
do you wanna answer this or comment it?
Well, yeah, answer, I think. I love the parallel with the food sector, because it's about that, to be transparent, how we can access the data to be sure that we have a greener product, including drugs. So what this means actually. And considering we received this point that was really from the organizers, considering that according to the UN, the access to healthcare is a fundamental human right. Should be food, of course, good food. And who is responsible for that? And how to guarantee that we have a parallel universe to provide that? I think these aspects are, and what kind of society do we have today, believing or not in science? We have to explain why vaccines are so important, and how to educate society to first understand the role of drugs. We need that. And yesterday we had a very exciting discussion, all of us, that, okay, if we provide good food, we are sleeping well, etc., doing gym, etc., we can live better and more. But in the end, we will need medicines in some point, all of us. I liked Franz, your question, maybe for the young ones. Yeah. Have you took maybe a pill today? Maybe not, but we will need medicine one day. Of course, we will use them. How to produce, how to use, and how to understand this kind of greennesses, and what this means actually, and what kind of parallel society could we have or construct to understand the benefits of such drugs. I think this is the point, to understand, to have transparency. This is actually to be more sustainable, and to go, it's go beyond or understand much better what we have and to project the future. Because we are constructing the future today. Like you mentioned, your kids, my daughter also, she prepared me, this is a very known story in our university. In the Mother's Day, she prepared me a vegan burger. Oh, it was, yeah. I tried, and it was the same story. I tried to see the elements there, and I was, of course, it depends the company, etc., etc. But it's so important to understand what we are intaking and the function of these and the consequences. This is not only a personal aspect or decision. And we are living in a very selfish kind of society. We need to have this broader and more generous views. Also the companies, maybe profit, it's understood today as money, but time it's not money, it's life actually. And I think this is a very controversial point, but should be put on the table to be discussed. Who is responsible to provide the fundamental human right that is related to health care? This is a very good question, and I thank you, the organization, to put it here because it's really fundamental. Thanks for the question. It's not an answer. It's yeah, just to continue the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Vanya. Aaron, do you have another question?
Yeah, there is a question here in the online chat, and yeah, maybe I can just release it so everybody can read it here. It would be, could tighter collaboration between academia and the pharma industry improve research and drug development of neglected diseases?
Yeah, I think we in part touched on this. Perhaps we should again go back to this point. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I see this happening already. I mean, I see there's, and you know, when I think back to my days in pharma in general, you know, being able to do basic and applied research really wasn't the main focus. It was, you know, the larger, later stage development. I think academia is really ripe and has the opportunity to do the basic and applied research. And you see now more and more collaborations between pharma and academia for both neglected diseases and other diseases as well. So to me, this is happening already. I think the downside, though, and where there's a cautionary note, is then, you know, the industry then buys this up, and then, you know, how do you not exclude out your academic partnerships? How do you build those strong partnerships to enable continued collaboration and development and driving things forward? So I think there has to be a clear balance associated with that. And, you know, sometimes industry comes in as the 800-pound gorilla, so to speak, and drives over, you know, sort of the fundamental research. And I think we need to take a step back and have an open aperture and make sure that the academic groups have a very large and important seat at the table, from my perspective.
Thank you very much, Dan. I think there was another question there in the room.
Thank you so much. We started the discussion mentioning the greenhouse gas emissions of the healthcare sector, and we haven't gone directly at that issue too much. So I guess I wonder what parts of the drug development process, whether it's manufacturing or the supply chain or electricity, are actually creating the most greenhouse gases. And given the problems with the incentives of companies, how can you address those?
Yeah, I think that's also a very good question, but not an easy one. As I mentioned in the intro, there was, and obviously also there we did some research on this. There was one study like 2 years ago in the I think Journal of Cleaner Production. It's this name, quite actually in the journal with quite a high impact factor, and that stated, as I said, that actually let's say the whole healthcare business, and that's already the first thing, right? It's not just talking about pharmaceutical enterprises, but also the healthcare business, including hospitals, for example, right? Has a larger, let's say, carbon footprint than the automotive industry. Just as a production, from the perspective of a production, if you look into this, I think that's a complex topic. So what's clear from this analysis, as far as I understood it, is that, for example, the hospitals play quite a role also in this. So it's not just about the manufacturing; it's also about the hospitals, and it's quite difficult also to say because, let's say, the variance. This was taken with the 15 top pharma companies in the US, by the way, also based on data that was requested by Barack Obama at that time from these enterprises. The variance between these 15 enterprises is quite high. So it's higher than, for example, if you compare this with the automotive industry, which shows, let's say, in a way, there are some guys which are more ahead than other guys, right? So some companies are already, let's say, lower on carbon footprints than other ones at this level. But perhaps let's give this question to Sebastian.
My personal, let's say, view or even what I recognize is the good thing is we are talking about this. The next thing is we are interested in to understand where are our really carbon footprints, let's say, on a medicine are coming from. And I just had recently, 2 weeks ago, let's say, a highlight where everyone was not aware of. If you're thinking about your personal house, if you're producing your warm water, normally you produce it in a boiler somewhere in the cellar, and you just pump it around every time that you can use it someday when you just reopen your water tap. You're wasting a very high energy on just really pumping it around and keeping it accessible at the point of use. Let's say in a lot of production plants, you see this in the same way. So what is, and this is an enabler, what we directly now see is if we can, let's say, shrink our modules and intensify the processes, you can supply the energy media at the point of use when you need it. And this will enable us, and we do see there a big potential, but this is totally new. This is really, nobody has thought about this in the first way, but as we are now asking and requesting these kind of informations, we are learning these kind of change of where are our carbon footprints really are coming from. And this is the interesting part, and at the end it's the collaboration part, and honestly, I learned today or yesterday that the major impact, what we have seen here now in the poll, I was also thinking the production of medicine is the major part. And now we are starting to learn it could be also the sustainability and environment aspects. We are learning, and I think this is the important part. And now we have to start to react and supply with new technologies, and this is then where is the important thing of working together from the industry and the, let's say, scientific part. And there's a lot of interaction on this. And what I really like is that we are also starting to interact on the industry level itself. So we are really opening and discussing this with a lot of other companies now, this technology. And what we all agree is we want to be open of this. This is an open access technology, what we're talking about. And this enables you, in addition, to be faster on this. So it's evolving. I would say we are learning. Is really the raw materials or the manufacturing or the energies or something else the impact on the carbon footprint? Actually, I do not know.
May I add something?
Sure.
We also discussed a lot about a very interesting example. For instance, according to the principles of green chemistry, we should use room temperature, pressure, etc. But actually, we need to apply metrics. Of course, we need to decide which one is better for each application. And we had a very interesting example. So changing the temperature a little bit we can have. It's not about the yield, but how to be not only faster, but to be, let's say, to use enough. This is the key word. What is enough to obtain what we need for a certain time? And if you could explain what you tell us, because they just change a little bit the temperature above the, let's say, 100 degrees. And according to the principles, if you are very restricted, we are not thinking correctly. We are only doing the checklist, you know, tick, tick, tick. No. And sometimes it's not working like that. We need to talk to our colleagues to understand maybe other colleagues, and then I would like to pass the word because I really appreciate this example.
I like pictures from what everyone has in mind, and I know if I'm going in, if I'm cooking a big meal, and normally you take a normal pot, you heat it, and you wait 1 or 2 hours because it's 1 kilogram of meat, yeah, and you want to be, and should be very, let's say, if we're yeah, it should fellow out together, so you really wait 2 hours for this. If you take not a normal pot, if you take a pressurized pot, it's only taking you 1 hour. And this is the same topic. What I'm telling with this, enable us to use new technologies during our manufacturing will enable us to be also efficient, more efficient during the production. The example what Vanya mentioned was there is in chemistry world there's one classical reaction called the Zucchi reaction. If you do it in a normal pot, what we have seen, this is 7 years ago, it took us 2 hours to produce these kind of materials in the quality aspects. And what we did was we changed it. We went to a new process, or intensified process, and we could, just by pressurizing the system, increase the time or decrease the time from 2 hours to 2 minutes with the same quality aspects and the same yield. But you only can do this if you're using new technologies. And this is the thinking what has to change, and everyone should start to use this. And it's, at the end, it's a combination of finding the right route, finding the right raw materials, identifying the right molecule, which is from the environmental point of view very interesting. And this is this collaboration part, which is very important for us all to understand and to work together.
So, is there another online question? Okay, so I think the truth is, coming to your very valid question, we do not have too much solid data yet on this. And that's also what these authors in 2019 stated, is that there were not many studies before on this. So I think they were really the first ones who tried a more holistic study on this. I think what one can say is for sure, and if you look at the internet pages of for example, pharmaceutical companies, I think they're really, of course, they have an interest in this topic, that's for sure. They look for, of course, just also to save energy, because in the end, this is also costs. I mean, they're really looking into this. I think there's some areas, and Sebastian very nicely pointed this out with Vanya, where there is a certain attention on, such as manufacturing, because you see these big plants, and now, of course, getting smaller, as we just learned, in the context of carbon footprint. However, there are other areas which also significantly contribute, such as hospitals, or just business travel, by the way, is also a significant factor in this, which I think will come more into the attention of this overall equation. I'm sure we will see more data on this in the future. With this, I would like to ask, is there, let's say, a final question here in the room? So to say, last call here.
Yes, I have one question, because I think these are great ideas. Do you see that any of that is coming shortly into reality, like mandatory measuring, or at least measuring and starting to set up the criteria? And what would be the duration? Because we do not have a lot of time until 1.5 is reached.
Okay, so perhaps we can also make a very short final round here. I think, NEELE, perhaps a short final statement here from your side.
Regarding this question?
No, general. On our round here.
I think a very important learning is it's a very complex topic. We need different expertise to be combined, to work together. It's very about creating awareness and thinking about which steps are more efficient to reach the goal in a good, timely manner. Yeah.
Dan, you also want to give a final perspective from you on the discussion we had?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we all acknowledge it's a complicated opportunity that we need to solve here, but I think collectively it's going to take a huge group of individuals to focus on this, to be open-minded and thoughtful as we approach it. And I see that, there's been a lot of good points raised today. It's like, how do we take those as actionable steps and drive towards solutions over the near, mid, and long term?
And then I hand it over to our next online colleague here, Al.
Yeah, I want to look at the audience, who unfortunately I can't see, and what's the common thing between the drive for green chemistry or accessible medicines. It's not the industry, it's policy. And who drives policy but voters? And so I think that don't look to industry or to us or people like me to do it. Think of us all as citizens. And if we can demand, as it were, less impact on the environment, if we can demand a system in which medicines are accessible, then innovators like we have around the table will get to work with that on that mission and will come up with solutions. In the absence of society telling us we need greener chemistry, or in the absence of society telling us everyone on the planet should have access to medicines, it won't happen. Industry won't do this, or academia won't do this by themselves. It needs to have a push from you guys, everybody in the audience there. You're the most important ones.
So Vanya, and really asking perhaps for a short final statement here, so to say.
Very short, thank you. And it's very exciting to reflect about this topic. And I would just try to highlight the word responsibility for all. Actually, we need to collaborate, of course, but we need to be, knowledge is power, but it should be also applied in the good sense in a dialogical way. And today, maybe to create good policies or drivers, this should be something for also greener medicines. And yeah, I would say that creating a more sustainable way to dialogue, to see what is the better for the common good, actually. Yeah, very short. It's
Yes.
very difficult to...
Thank you, Sebastian.
Be curious. I think it's the interesting thing is really if you're curious and ask questions, you will see sometimes coming up answers and new ideas which help us to solve these problems.
Thank you very much. I think we are just in time to close this up. First of all, I would really like to thank the audience, the online audience participating, the people here in the room. I think, of course, I would really like to thank the panelists, let's say, getting up in the night or let's say in the very, very early morning. This, of course, goes to Dan and Al, and of course the panelists here with NEELE and Vanya and Sebastian coming over here to Berlin. To this wonderful event. And from my side, I really appreciated the discussion. Of course, I appreciate that this is a complex topic and there's no black and white and there are no easy solutions. I think for me, the take-home message is not that we found solutions yet. I think we are starting collecting ideas on this. What does it mean to have green science for green medicines? And then we really have to discuss this, of course, also with stakeholders beyond this round. And with this, I thank you all and wish you a great event here at the Natural Museum of the Museum of Natural History here in Berlin. Thank you.
Thank you.